In May 2016, 80-year-old Andrew Wright traveled from his home in Dunblane, Scotland to Riverside, California, a distance of more than 5,100 miles that took more than 24 hours to complete. The renowned master of pibroch, at the invitation of the school, spent 2 weeks teaching, discussing, and performing ceol for students at the University of California, Riverside. 20 miles southeast of Los Angeles, UCR has an enrollment of about 22,000 students and a solid Scottish tradition. Its sports teams are called the Highlanders, and the school supports more than one pipe band. Until he retired a few years ago, the well-known award-winning piper Ian Whitelaw was the music director of UCR's pipe bands and a lecturer in bagpipes and Scottish music for 15 years. Born in Manchester, England, he and his family moved to Canada when he was 3 years old, settling in Hamilton, Ontario. He would play with the Grade 1 City of Toronto and Erskine pipe bands before he moved to Vancouver in the late 1970s, joining Grade 1 Triumph Street. Ian Whitelaw eventually settled in Redondo Beach, California in 1979 and lived an idyllic life in Southern California for the next 40 years. He was a front-rank piper with the Grade 1 LA Scots and the Simon Fraser University Pipe Band, gaining a reputation worldwide as a supreme soundman with a keen ear for tuning and tone. His competitive solo career was deep, gaining prizes throughout North America and in the major solo competitions in Scotland. After meeting him in the 1970s, Whitelaw became a devotee of Andrew Wright through the annual summer schools in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and other workshops. For over 4 decades, Wright was Whitelaw's mentor in pibroch and a close friend in life. Though 5,000 miles apart, the two spoke almost daily, discussing pibroch and all things piping and more general matters of living, as close friends do. At University of California, Riverside, Professor Ian Whitelaw taught a Music of Scotland course that included cantaroch and classical music, and was the ensemble director of the pipe band and the bagpipe degree program. UCR students could actually get their music degree with a piping major. After retiring 3 years ago, he moved to Bellingham, Washington to be closer to his daughter and grandchildren. As Whitelaw was nearing the end of his time at UCR, he decided that it was time to bring Andrew Wright to Riverside. He convinced the powers at UCR that a fortnight with the pibroch master would be an excellent use of funds. The result was full-on pibroch immersion for Whitelaw and his students. They listened to Wright's words and heard his music through cantaroch and piping performances. Andrew Wright passed away in 2022, leaving a legacy of pibroch teaching and study that positively impacted the music and its performance. Part of that legacy is his time in Southern California, about as far removed from Bororeg on the Isle of Skye as can be imagined. We were pleased to connect online with Ian Whitelaw to discuss the experience and gather several video pieces that help communicate what went on for those 2 weeks in May 2016 at the University of California, Riverside. We began by hearing how he and Andrew Wright initially met.
I met Andrew Wright at a piping school in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I had recently moved from the Toronto area to Vancouver and, got involved in the professional class and got invited to go down to teach at the Coeur d'Alene Piping School by Colonel John McEwing. He was quite a character and a really big pibroch enthusiast. In fact, he began the Spokane Pibroch Society. When I got to Coeur d'Alene, I got there early. It was held at the North Idaho College, and it was the most beautiful, warm, brilliant, sunshiny day. And I heard this bagpipe in the distance, and I thought, well, where did that come from? So I went over and I found this fellow playing what I figured out to be Lament for Donald Dougal Mackay, and I knew very little about pibroch. I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't know anything about it. But there was a guy called Colin Gemmell playing Donald Dougal on the most amazing bagpipe I'd ever heard. I was sitting there in the grass thinking, boy, I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to play that. So he finished and I introduced myself and he says, oh, you're Ian Whitelaw. I heard about you. Let's go to the bar. So we went to the bar and talked about a lot of stuff. And he said, oh, wait till you meet Andrew Wright. He's just the best. And, we I didn't know anything from anything. And then, so I was one of the instructors, and right away, Andrew was kind and funny and engaging, and never, ever, ever, ever looked at the music. People would ask him about some third line of some tune, and he's, oh yeah, well, that, Donald McDonald setting is a little bit better for that one. And what I just came to understand is he was a man that was completely and utterly devoted and dedicated to Pibroch. And I would sit there in my chair looking at him and just experiencing him as a guy that was like in the middle of the tune. It wasn't just, well, you hold this note and you play it like this. It was like his eyes would turn to glass almost, and he would just play this stuff that always made sense. It seemed doable and it seemed fun. And the way he approached every tune was all about how to draw the most music out of it. And it was never anything that was based on success or, well, I won the gold medal with such and such. And it was kind of like that all the time. I would make a point of having lunch with him when I was teaching there, front row seat for his recital. And I thought the recital was always great because he never played any light music, maybe a 6/8 march. Everything else was just P-rock after P-rock, ground, ground, ground variation, Tarlo a singling, stop playing another one. It wasn't just what he played, it was how. And I'm a big believer in how, because I feel like if we see how it affects us and see how it sounds and how we feel about it, then we have an opportunity at that point to discover the things that we can do to affect the transmission of that tune. And the deeper we get into the middle of the tune, then the more it can be celebrated, and the more it can be appreciated by, somebody just hearing it for the first time or playing it in a competition. It never seemed to matter. The thing about him, that I really loved was his candid nature. Like he talked about um, his relationship with some of the other big time personalities back in the day, like Don McLeod and the McFadgens and Pipe Band Association, because he also played in the Red Hackle, and I was at that time playing in the Triumph Street Pipe Band under the direction of Hal Sennick and crew, Willie McCurlin and all those guys. So it was he had his feet in both sides of the street, so to speak. He had the pipe band thing, and then he also had the P-Rock thing. And so when he spoke, he would talk about, well, you always have to be yourself, and he said, you never pee anyone, but I had never heard that from anybody else, and I thought I could really see myself learning a lot from this man. As it turned out, over 40 years with him.
Ian Whitelaw and Andrew Wright's relationship would blossom. They shared recordings for many years, well beyond annual meetings at piping summer schools.
Yeah, back in the day, it was all cassette recordings. I would usually ask him for a couple of tunes, and he'd fill them up. He'd fill up a tape, and then I'd spend time with it, and then I would record myself playing it and send it over. And he would listen to it and say, you're really close here, and you need to spend more time on this, and talk to him on the phone. I had these monster phone bills because back in those days, the phone was really expensive, and communication was difficult. And I've got boxes and boxes of cassette tapes. I haven't got them all digitally recorded yet, but something that I probably want to do at some point, just to keep them all. I asked him about if he had a photographic memory, because I never saw him look at a book ever. he said, well, I don't have a photographic memory, but once I learn a tune, it's mine forever.
So, how did University of California, Riverside get involved so deeply with piping?
The mascot of the university is the Highlanders, and the school itself is very firmly entrenched in the whole Scottish idea, and colleges around the country and around the world really they're super interested in diversity and inclusion and making things available for you know unlikely suspects. And so I was teaching a class called Music of Scotland, which was a class that entailed some study of the bagpipe, the basic, how it works and where it came from and blah blah blah. And I also incorporated the historical um, interests of Scottish musicians, contemporary artists. My sort of go-to guy at university was a man by the name of Walter Clark, who was a great believer in the program and just supported everything I really wanted to do. Well, I came to him with the idea to bring Andrew Wright over. I thought, who better to talk about the music than my teacher and my mentor, Andrew Wright. It took 5 minutes of talking about him and played a few recordings. And he said, well, I'm sold. Let's just leave it with me and we'll make it happen. And he did. We, you know, brought him over to basically to teach my class for the week. And he could talk about whatever he wanted. He had a whole lesson plan. He came super prepared. He had recordings, he had handouts. As you know, the video, I had it recorded by the university, and if you watch the video, you can see how just thoroughly engaging he is, and he's just like an example of a master musician that had nothing to do with winning medals or trophies or cups, or it was all about what the music was like and how you know pastoral it can be, beauty of the bagpipe, how it sounds, and how it feels to the listener. He was able to convey that to people with virtually no musical experience. They weren't musicians. They didn't play instruments. They didn't know anything about music. They didn't know anything about anything. But the class that I had them going to come and teach was the one that was in the last quarter before the summer holiday, and there was probably 65 students, and they were engaged, they were respectful, and they knew that they were in the midst of greatness. It was just one of those moments that you just kind of think, is he really here? Everybody that's seen the recordings are, this white-haired guy that was just amazing. And just you just knew that he knew what he was communicating. It was great.
In a few days, we'll continue our conversation with Ian Whitelaw in part two and bring readers a few very special and exclusive pieces by Andrew Wright himself.